Welcome, everybody, to the NFL Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The NFL Show is brought to you by Replenishing Care and Technologies. Go check them out at rcandt.com. I am your co-host for the NFL Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in my other co-host, Sam Teets. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing great, Mike. How about you?
All right. And also, as we have over the last few shows, we can't seem to get rid of him. That would be our guest analyst, Sam McGinnis. How you doing, Sam?
I'm doing good.
Must not be any hockey playoffs on today, huh?
Actually, there is. They're at 8.
Oh, all right. Well, it's at 8, and I want to bring up to everybody, if you're watching this tonight at 8 o'clock, me and at least one of the Sams will be back with a live preview show for the NFC East. But today we're going to talk AFC South, and this may be the strangest division in football. And I think the last few months, it's been even getting stranger. The Texans traded their best player, not named Deshaun Watson. The Titans backed out of going after Tom Brady to focus on building around Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill. And every team in some way here seems to be reeling from some kind of disappointment. Houston not only blew a 24-point playoff lead to the Chiefs, but also had a chance to host the AFC Championship game. Tennessee, after beating the heavily favored Ravens, fell to Kansas City after blowing a lead a week later. So this is a division, Sam Teets, where we could have had a Houston-Tennessee AFC Championship game. But now I don't even think Houston and Tennessee are considered really that big of threats to do anything in this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, outside of New England's division, this might be the weakest division in the AFC, and it's probably one of the weaker divisions in the NFL. So it's kind of surprising to consider what we saw last playoffs, but honestly, just looking at it from a personnel standpoint, these teams are not nearly as talented as some of the other divisions we've already covered. So I don't see this division being super dangerous, especially teams like Baltimore, Kansas City. I think this is going to be a competitive division. It's going to be fun with the interdivision games, but not necessarily an important one throughout the year.
Yeah, I think the Colts are probably the division's most fascinating team. And they are the one team, it seems, in the offseason actually tried to make themselves better, Sam McGinnis.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to also have the O-line for Phillip Rivers, especially being older. It's always nice to have an O-line. Apparently, one gives a rip about the Colts line there.
Gives a rip? What's that mean? I'm not tongue-tied. We're going to talk about the Indianapolis Colts. And I think if Phillip Rivers could show his old spark and perform instead of what he normally is, he could perform like a game manager here. He's got young wide receivers in Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell. You got Marlon Mack. You got Jonathan Taylor added from Wisconsin. This is a team that seems loaded on offense if Rivers has anything left, Sam Teets.
Yeah, I think so. If he can just throw for 3,500 yards this coming year, if he can throw for maybe 20 touchdowns, only like 8 or 9 interceptions, I think that's good enough for them to win a lot of games. They could get to 9 or 10 wins just because that backfield, it's loaded. You mentioned Marlon Mack, Jonathan Taylor. It's even more than that. You got Hines, who's a really good receiving back, and you got Jordan Wilkins, who's a really good depth piece. You got Jack Doyle, who's a great blocking tight end, and that offensive line is one of the best in football. So to me, this has to be a run team. This should be a team like the 49ers were last year, where it was a run-heavy team, and you threw the ball when you had to.
Yeah, and the thing is, you do have a guy in Phillip Rivers who, if he's got anything left, can make a difference here. I think the investment in defensive tackle DeForest Buckner has to reap rewards for this Indianapolis defense if the Colts want to be a Super Bowl contender, Sam McGinnis.
Yeah, they definitely need the defensive end too. I'm not totally in on the Colts being super successful, but I think they're definitely going to need defensive talent as well to succeed. I think, the saying is defense wins championships for a reason.
Yeah, but Kansas City won the Super Bowl last year, so that doesn't always hold true. And the thing is this, though. When you look at this, Sam McGinnis, this is a team that with Marlon Mack and Jonathan Taylor could be a run-heavy offense, which limits how much your defense is on the field, too, which can also help a defense that may not be that great.
Well, yeah, and we saw this now, granted, the defense was good with the Tennessee Titans last year, but we saw the use of run game management with the Titans last playoff. So if they can duplicate something like that and even make it a little better and not blow leads, in the conference finals there, they'll have a much better chance of going further.
Well, actually, Sam Teets, what Sam McGinnis said, and I hate to say this, but makes a lot of sense because if you look at this, I mean, you could make the case that the Colts with an older Phillip Rivers, I mean, kind of are a lot like the Tennessee Titans were last year.
No, I agree with you. Sam McGinnis made a ton of sense there. It was kind of took me back a little bit. But at the same point, I mean, you're right, though. You're right because the Phillip Rivers he was a mediocre quarterback throughout the year. I mean, Ryan Tannehill was a mediocre quarterback throughout his early years, but last season he set records in passer rating for himself, touchdown interception ratio, those kinds of things. If they could do something similar with Phillip Rivers where you're running the ball 20 to 30 times a game and Phillip Rivers does not have to be the main star of the offense, I think you absolutely could win a lot of games. You could make the playoffs. You could potentially even win a playoff game with that kind of offense.
Well, yeah, I think actually with that kind of offense, I mean, that kind of offense can win a lot of play. And really, we saw it last year when they went to Kansas City and beat the Chiefs. I mean, that kind of offense can limit how much the Kansas City Chiefs or the Baltimore Ravens offense is on the field when the Colts play them. So I don't think it's beyond comprehension here. The Colts, you can find them in the AFC Championship game if everything works out perfectly, but we also know it usually doesn't, Sam McGinnis.
Yeah, things working out perfectly is very difficult. But yeah, I think the style is especially helpful for Phillip Rivers getting older. Having to throw less may be helpful for him and actually help him get his game better for the limited amount of throws he will have.
All right, so let's move on to the Tennessee Titans. And how big a signing is Jadeveon Clowney here, Sam Teets?
I mean, to me, it's not really a huge signing for them at all because I think it's not going to come down to their defense. I think it's really going to come down to what Tennessee can do offensively to get them to the Super Bowl. Now, up to a point, the defense will be important. When it comes to containing someone like Lamar Jackson, I think Clowney is essential because he's a great run defender. He's got versatility very few defensive ends can match. So it comes to containing and keeping someone like Lamar Jackson or even Patrick Mahomes inside the pocket, he's a great player to have. But we're talking about superstar players who are going to make a huge difference in the season. I don't think Jadeveon Clowney is that kind of guy.
I think that from what we've seen from Jadeveon Clowney, Sam McGinnis, he's hot and he's cold. But I think it's a huge signing because of this. If you do have the kind of run offense that they had last year, Tannehill can hit the play action passes. When you play a team like a Kansas City or a Baltimore, a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, if he's top of his game, could make a huge difference.
Well, and especially if it is playing someone like Lamar Jackson, who is very run heavy, it will be very helpful to be able to keep him on the ground the majority of the time, or at least contained, because once you let guys like that out of the pocket, you're screwed.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this depends on Ryan Tannehill, who I actually think has been a solid quarterback his entire career. He's had injury issues, but if he stays healthy, he's got A.J. Brown, Sam Teets, and with A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, I mean, they can score points and they can control the clock. So I think when you look at this, I think the Titans are the biggest. I think this is basically a two-horse race between the Titans and the Colts.
Yeah, I said this division is going to be super unpredictable, so I have no idea what's exactly going to happen here. But I'm not as afraid of Tennessee as I think some people are, specifically because, I mean, Tannehill, like I said, had a phenomenal season last year, but he was played so much better than he has at any point during his career. I agree he's not a bad quarterback, but he played so much better and more consistently. It was more productive than he had been at any point in his career prior to last season. I find it hard to believe he'll have 2 years in a row like that.
All right, let's move on to the Houston Texans. They've got Deshaun Watson, which gives them a chance in any game. But I think Bill O'Brien has really screwed the pooch, so to speak, Sam Teets.
Yeah, you could say that, just a little bit. I mean, trading DeAndre Hopkins for, what was it, David Johnson, a bag of peanuts? I mean, it really doesn't help you out when you get rid of a superstar receiver like that for a worn-down running back who hasn't proved anything the past 3 years. I think they totally screwed this offense up. I know adding Brandon Cooks might help them a little bit, but I think you're leaving Deshaun Watson out there on an island and hoping he can succeed.
Yeah, and when you look at him, you've got Deshaun Watson. His receivers look like they'll be Will Fuller, newly acquired Brandon Cooks, and Randall Cobb. David Johnson at running back, though, hasn't really done anything in, 4 years? So when I look at this, Sam McGinnis, I think there's a lot of problems in Houston, and I think the biggest problem is the offensive line has been terrible in the past. They've got a lot of new offensive linemen, a lot of young guys here that need to develop quickly, and with no preseason games, no OTAs, I find it hard to believe that the Houston Texans are really going to be able to compete for a playoff berth here.
Well, and even consider we were talking about running backs. How much harder is it for a running back to succeed behind a bad O-line? I mean, it's already hard for the quarterback, but now you've also made it hard for the running back as well. So even if you had a decent running back, it would be that much harder without a good O-line. So I think that really can be a huge base for any offense because it really is the start to everything. So without it, it makes it much harder to succeed. And I wouldn't be surprised to find Deshaun Watson at some point during the season injured because there's no offensive line. It's literally Deshaun Watson and maybe Brandon Cooks against the world on the offense.
Well, and I think the worst case scenario here, Sam Teets, is Hopkins goes and thrives in Arizona. The Texans stumble. Watson grows unhappy behind a young offensive line. And then you've got a huge mess here, which I think will lead to Bill O'Brien this being his final season in Houston.
Yeah. Well, Watson did recently sign a 4-year, $160 million extension, so he's there through 2025. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. Bill O'Brien, on the other hand, I agree with you. I think if the Houston Texans miss the playoffs this year, and like I said, if DeAndre Hopkins plays well, this is going to be all on Bill O'Brien, the GM, and the head coach. So I don't expect him to return next year, especially if this team ends up going 8-8, 7-9, and doesn't make the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think here, Sam Tees, is the perfect example of how many head coaches are actually can pull off being the GM and the head coach. Because I thought Bill O'Brien, his first 4 years or so in Houston, did a great job. He never really had a quarterback, but it seemed like every year they'd win 9 games, they'd make the playoffs. I think he's a good football coach, but I think this is another case where GM and head coach is a little bit too much for most people to handle.
Yeah, he's been a solid head coach. The issue is he just made some very poor decisions. You basically trade away Jadeveon Clowney and don't get anything for him. You alienate Dwayne Brown, who was your left tackle before Laremy Tunsil. And now you throw away DeAndre Hopkins. You didn't even get a first-round pick out of it. I just don't understand. And even David Johnson, the running back, he might be worse than Carlos Hyde, who you had last year. So I just don't understand any of the moves they made this offseason.
So we moved to the Jacksonville Jaguars. It says Sam Teets is in Clemson. Do you think that Trevor Lawrence is a little bit worried right now because he might have to be a Jacksonville Jaguar?
He's going to have to be a Jacksonville Jaguar at this rate. They're trading away the whole team. I mean, seriously, think of the guys they've gotten rid of this offseason. A.J. Bouye, Calais Campbell, Yannick Ngakoue, Ronnie Harrison they just traded away. Leonard Fournette they cut for nothing. I mean, you can't tell me. I know players don't tank because players need to put up good film to keep their jobs or to get new ones. But organizations and front office absolutely can do this, and that's exactly what's happening here. They're not trying to win games this year.
Yeah, when you look at that, Leonard Fournette is now the latest one to leave Sam McGinnis. So I would say the Jaguars, you can put them in the NBA. They're trying to get the number 1 pick. And what we saw was last year, Miami kind of did the same thing a little bit, and it backfired because their coach did a good job and they won 4 or 5 games and screwed it up. But I think when we look at this roster, I think it's really hard to see Jacksonville winning more than a game or 2.
They're gonna suck. I love what Gardner Minshew said though. Is like we're not tanking, and I'm just sitting back here like right. Yeah, no,
they're not exactly tanking. The players aren't tanking. It's the front office that's tanking it. The players are still going to play hard.
Players, I'm not sure I ever believe that a player tanks, at least most of the time, because nobody likes losing, regardless of what the potential for it is or not. But yeah, front offices for sure.
Yeah, when you look at Gardner Minshew, I mean, he's trying to keep his job or at least be the backup to Trevor Lawrence in the future. I think the best case scenario here, if you're a Jaguar fan and you want to see wins instead of Trevor Lawrence, is that Minshew develops into a reliable quarterback. Chenault, the new wide receiver who was drafted in the 2nd round, proves to be really good. And then maybe you can win 4 or 5 games and they emerge from the season feeling good enough about the foundation to spend big on free agents in 2021 and make a run at the division next year. But then again, they could go the opposite direction. Maybe if you're a Jaguars fan, I'm a Bengals fan, and the Bengals getting the 1st-round pick last year, I actually just watched games hoping they would lose so we could get Joe Burrow. So as a Jaguar fan, if I was a Jaguar fan, I would just want to lose all the games and hope that all this money they've saved leads to Trevor Lawrence. They spend big in free agency, and maybe next year you're winning 6 or 7 games and you have a foundation for the future. And I think when you look at Doug Marrone, I don't think this is a guy that's done a really great job. This is a team that was in the AFC Championship 2 years ago, Sam McGinnis. But I think Doug Marrone, doesn't he have to be on the hot seat, or is this something where, since they've basically taking all chance of winning from him, that maybe he gets another shot with Trevor Lawrence?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what their philosophy is. If because they've taken everything away, they're not as worried about how he will do as much, I could see that being a thing. Because, like, if our team, for instance, had maybe a quarter of the talent it does now, we wouldn't expect to win as much. And just the same would be here. So maybe if he excelled despite that, he would stick around, but it all depends on what their mentality is.
If the team you had less talent, Sam McGinnis, you'd still win. The coaching's brilliant. Go ahead, Sam Teets.
Yeah, I think Doug Marrone should have been fired. I think Doug Marrone should have been fired earlier this offseason. I think the Jaguars messed up here. Look at what Miami did. They brought Brian Flores in, and they kind of gave him a year to get used to the staff, and then they set him up with a high draft pick. I think that's what Jacksonville should have done. You should have fired Doug Marrone at the end of last season, brought in a new head coach, maybe Eric Bieniemy from the Chiefs, brought someone else in, and then give him a chance to draft 1 year and then go in and get a high pick the next year. I think they made a mistake by keeping Doug Marrone around. I think he'll be gone at the end of this season.
Yeah, but is it a mistake, or is it the fact that they don't think he's that good of a coach? And if you want to get the first pick, you want to lose games. And if you look at Miami loses out on Joe Burrow. The only saving grace for Miami when they won the 4 or 5 games was the fact that Tua was still there because Tua had an injury issue. Without that, they would be not in as good a shape as what they are right now. They still got their quarterback in the future. The problem is this: if all of a sudden you're well coached and you somehow figure out a way to win 4 or 5 games and your team plays hard, then who are you picking? Because then you lose out on Trevor Lawrence. So I think that this is brilliant by the front office in Jacksonville, because I think Doug Marrone's a guy that I thought did a great coaching job with the Buffalo Bills a few years back. They go 9-7. And then he basically quit on his team. To me, that tells me a lot about Doug Marrone. And I don't think Doug Marrone belongs as a head coach in the NFL. And I just have huge questions about Doug Marrone, Sam Teets.
Yeah, no, I remember that story. He basically bailed on Buffalo after they had a decent year, after he had been really working hard with his guys. And he full on left them. I don't know how you could trust a head coach like that. So to me, if I'm a player, I would have a lot of trouble trusting him. And also the front office in Jacksonville in general hasn't been great recently. So there's no trust there between the players and the leadership. We saw Yannick Ngakoue take $5 or $6 million less just to get out of Jacksonville and go to Minnesota. Leonard Fournette,
he was acting like Jacksonville was Cleveland.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it kind of is at this point. I mean, it really isn't a great situation.
No, it's not. It's a lot nicer in Jacksonville than it is Cleveland.
Yeah, maybe city-wise that's true.
I've been to both places. Cleveland's miserable. Jacksonville's actually pretty. So when we look at this AFC South, and we just talked about the Jacksonville Jaguars and how 2017 during the AFC Championship game, their run was really similar to what Tennessee did last year. You also had some similarities where you had Blake Bortles, who for some reason for those last 6 or 7 games played out of his mind. You had a running game with Fournette. And now when you look and you fast forward to Tennessee, it's kind of the same thing. I think the one difference is Doug Marrone as opposed to Mike Vrabel. So I think Tennessee has a much better chance to extend this. But what do you think are the chances, Sam Teets, that maybe they regress much like Jacksonville did?
I would say highly, because I already said I don't believe in Ryan Tannehill putting up the same numbers he did last year. I don't think we'll get a full 16-game season of a Pro Bowl caliber Ryan Tannehill. I just don't see it happening. So to me, Tennessee is still talented enough to be a wild card team. I just don't see them being nearly as good as they were last year.
All right, Sam McGinnis, what do you think?
I feel very similarly to Sam Teets there. It's very hard to have top end years back to back unless he's unlocked a complete new phase of his career. But I kind of see them as the eternal 9-7 team where they're just good enough to make the playoffs, but you're never like super intrigued by them. Last year was kind of nuts to me. But yeah, I can see them as being a wild card team, especially with the new system.
All right. So do we all agree the Indianapolis Colts win this division?
Yeah, I hate taking away from Deshaun Watson, but I'll have to give it to you. The Colts just are built to be a better football team because of the offensive line, because of the running game. That has been successful in recent years. I don't think with the terrible offensive line in Houston, I don't think Deshaun Watson's set up to succeed.
Sam McGinnis?
Yeah, I mean, Deshaun Watson, even though it is him against the world, he will win a lot of those battles just because it's Deshaun Watson. But yeah, I think better supporting cast is just better for the team in general. The offensive line is where it starts, so I'm going to have to go with Colts maybe at 10-6 first in the division.
Well, I think this. I think the Colts win the division. They're the best team. They may have the best offensive line in football. I think this is all going to depend on Phillip Rivers, though. But the great thing about that is this. How about this, Sam Teets? If I told you right now Phillip Rivers couldn't play this season and Jacoby Brissett would start the whole season, I still think the Colts would win the division with Jacoby Brissett.
I wouldn't go that far, but I think you'd still win at least 8 games.
Why would you not go that far?
Because I trust Phillip Rivers to move the ball down the field more than just
But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is even without the Phillip Rivers addition, I think this team is far enough ahead of everybody else that even with Jacoby Brissett, I think they could win this division.
I would still disagree with you, but I think it would be.
How can you disagree with me? Because you just told me the Tennessee Titans would regress. They'd be an 8 or 9 win team. You've told me Jacksonville's terrible. You've told me Houston has nothing but Deshaun Watson. So why is it so crazy that the Colts would still be the best team in this division? Remember, what was the Colts' record before Brissett got hurt last year?
I'll pull it up real quick, but they did have. I think it was like. I don't want to speculate. I think it was like 6-2. They were doing pretty good.
They had just beaten Kansas City in Kansas City. So what I'm saying is, with this offensive line and these running backs, Jacoby Brissett is good enough to get them to the playoffs. Now, I think the difference between Brissett and Rivers is this. If Rivers still has something left, Rivers is good enough to possibly take them to the Super Bowl. Brissett is good enough to maybe win a playoff game. Because I really don't think Jacoby Brissett's that bad of an NFL quarterback. There's a lot of teams that are going to roll with worse starters in this league this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that part. That part with guys like Dwayne Haskins, Tyrod Taylor, definitely lower tiers than Jacoby Brissett. But you're right, it was 6-2. He opened 6-2, and then the injury against Pittsburgh, and just kind of never got back to where he was before that. I'll reverse my statement. I do think if he would have been the starter, I think Indianapolis would still have a leg up on the other teams in the division.
So once again, the one thing we take away from this show is I was right and you were wrong.
I so hope Houston wins this division. I absolutely hope Houston wins.
At least McGinnis made a good point today. So you're like in third place on this show today, Sam.
Listen, hey, we put it all together though. I think I'm probably at least like fighting for second here.
No, I don't remember a time where I've said, Sam, I think you had a good idea there. But I did say that to Sam McGinnis today.
It's a rare occasion, but it does happen.
Yeah, we should have brought that film up at the first play of Sam's varsity football game Friday night where he ran down and smacked that kid.
Hey, you asked me to be more physical. I got it done.
We'll have to put that up, and then especially the little dance when he's coming back to the sideline after. All right.
In my mind and what actually happened were two completely different things, but hey, it worked out. So
yeah, in Sam's mind, he knocked that kid's head completely off.
Clean slice.
And then he surgically repaired it right on the field, and then he ran over to the sideline to tell me about it. All right, guys. Any other comments on the AFC South? Sam McGinnis?
No, I got nothing.
Sam Teets?
I'll say this. Gardner Minshew, I think, if he was better coached, I think he could win you games. I think he could honestly go out there and win you 5 or 6 games just as himself if he had a better coach.
Could he win 5 or 6 games in Jacksonville?
No. He could win you 2 or 3.
So he's screwed either way. He's screwed either way.
Yeah.
All right, Sam McGinnis, tell us where we can follow you on Twitter.
You find me at Samuel McG22.
All right, Sam Teets.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Sam_Teets33. Feel free to go check out my content. I post new stuff every day.
All right. You can follow me at Grueling Truth. You can hear all of our podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn. You can see all the videos on YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, Facebook Live, YouTube Live. Me and Sam, maybe the other Sam, we got to see yet. We'll be back tonight at 8 o'clock to preview the NFC East, which looks like a Cowboys-Eagles battle. And then, of course, you've got a team with no nickname and a team with probably no chance to do anything in the New York Giants. So we'll talk about that tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern time. You can catch us live on Twitch, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook. Make sure you go like our Facebook group page. But for now, For Sam Teets, Sam McGinnis, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.